Hi, I'm Susan. We're in the sewing studio today with some quick tips for making beautiful buttonholes. When doing buttonholes for garments, there are a few things you're going to want to have on hand. First, the stitch plate for your sewing machine. Make sure you have the zigzag plate. This is the one with the wide opening. It allows the needle of your machine to swing from side to side and create your buttonhole. Your fabric, and I have one pre-set up with my interfacing already applied. You want to have interfacing in your garment, of course, at your openings, either your neck, at collar, or a cuff, or at a front or back placard. The interfacing provides added support for a wear area, which is your opening. That's the part that's handled most often. Interfacing comes in different weights for different applications. Choose the one that's appropriate for your garment. I do a setup ahead of time and have my interfacing preset onto my fabric. Now you're also going to want your buttonhole foot and your thread. I use an embroidery thread in both the bobbin and in my needle, and I will wind a bobbin about 1/4 full to accommodate for all my buttonholes on my garment. You will want to have your button, of course, one that you will be using on your garment, and either a buttonhole block and knife or a seam ripper, your choice. You want tearaway stabilizer and a washout topping stabilizer. Now your buttonhole foot may or may not have a stabilizer plate. That depends upon the model of your machine. Check with your manual. But it will have an adjustable back to allow for the button to be placed in it, so your buttonhole will be sized just to that particular button. Button into the back of your presser foot and attach the presser foot to your machine. Make sure that the presser foot is also all the way pushed to the back. Then slide your fabric into your machine. Now I've gone ahead and folded my facing back to the back side, and I have selected a standard buttonhole on my machine. Now take a piece of standard tearaway and slide that underneath your fabric and your buttonhole plate, and you will want a piece of the washout topping to slide directly under the presser foot on top of the fabric. Remember to pull down your lever and step on your foot control. Now the machine is going to sew backwards straight first and then do a satin stitch coming forward. When it gets to the front, it'll do your bar tack, straight stitch back, do your second bar tack, and do your satin stitch forward on your second leg of your buttonhole. Now remove it from your machine, remove your stabilizer, and you're ready to go on to your next buttonhole. But that gives you a beautiful buttonhole. When working with a mechanical machine, there's just a couple of extra steps you're going to have to take. First, you're going to have to dial your individual pieces. So one is going to be a satin bar, 2 is going to be your bar tack, 3 is going to be your second satin bar, and then you go back to 4 or 2 to get your second bar tack. Beyond that, you're also going to have to measure your distance for your buttonhole, and you want it to be about 1/8 of an inch larger on either side of your button. I've marked my fabric with a blue marker, but I also find that the pins, now I'm not going to sew over them, I'm going to sew up to them. The pins help in aiding me on working with this. Now I'm going to slide the pins so that they're off to the right. I have my tearaway stabilizer, to go underneath, and I have my washout stabilizer to go on top. Now, this machine, and I always do a test on my buttonholes regardless of the machine, this machine sews forward for the buttonhole. So I'm going to start at the back. So where my little red arrow is, I'm going to pull this full forward, and I'm going to place my arrow right where that first pin is. So it's not under the needle, it's just behind it. Going to lower our presser foot lifter, and we're going to stitch. Bring it all the way to just to the pin. Again, I'm not stitching over the pin, I'm stitching up to it. I'm going to turn my dial to dial number 2, and it's going to do my bar tack. Get the needle out of the fabric. There we go. We're going to set it to step number 3, and it's going to do my bar tack, or excuse me, my bar backwards. Again, going back to my pin where my arrow meets my pin, and that's behind the needle, so I don't have to worry about that. And back to step 2, which is also step 4, do my bar tack, and it's done. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and lock the stitches off by just doing a straight stitch. So we're going to go over to straight stitch, and I'm just going to take a couple little stitches there. Whoops, a couple little stitches to lock it. Okay, and that's my mechanical buttonhole. Pins out, and I have my buttonhole. I pulled out a shank button. I wanted to show the difference between just the flat button that we used before, like so, that has the holes going through the top, and a shank button that has the hole underneath. Has a little protrusion out the back, and that allows you to stitch, hand stitch the button to your garment. Shank buttons are normally used in coats or robes, or any time you've got a thick product that you need extra space to slide underneath the button. Lots of things, but you want a shank button for when you're doing extra heavy fabric. Now we're just going to do it on a regular fabric today, and I'm just going to slide this open, drop my button into place. There we go, and close that up. The shank on this does go down, and it will hold the button for me. Okay, so once I have the button into the back of the buttonhole foot, I'm going to attach the stabilizer plate and slide my fabric underneath and attach my buttonhole foot to the machine. Position the fabric where I want the buttonhole to be, and drop my presser foot. Okay, so we're ready to go. Now again, I don't have to do any other thing except slide my little buttonhole lever down. Make sure you do that, because the button machine won't work correctly if you don't. Check again with your owner's manual and make sure that you have everything aligned properly. The keyhole buttonhole is the one that has the rounded tip at one end. And if you get the buttonhole opener set, the knife and the awl, it will cut the keyhole opening round for you. Okay, pops it back when we're done. And there is our lovely keyhole buttonhole. A third type of buttonhole you can do is what's referred to as a corded buttonhole. Now, I just happen to have some pearl crown rayon here, and this makes lovely cording. Now, you can make your own. I believe my YouTube on Needles 2 has information on how to actually do your own cording. But you make that on your machine. And the way we make a corded buttonhole is we're going to take a loop, and it's going to go over the front end of the button foot, and it's going to just pop right in here like so, and the little fingers are going to hold it in place underneath the buttonhole foot itself. Then on the opposite side there is a lever on the back that's going to hold the cording for you. You're just going to push it down into the sides here. You want to make sure you have enough of a tail because you're going to bury that cord with the needle when we're done. Okay, so you can see the cording on how that's actually in the presser foot. And we're going to, again, I've got my button in the back, so it's already pre-sized for me. I'm going to do an automatic buttonhole. We're going to attach the buttonhole foot again. There we go. Same setup I had before, where I have stabilizer on the top and the bottom for my buttonhole. And you can align the buttonhole wherever you want your buttonhole to start. So we're just going to go ahead and step on the foot control, make sure my lever is pulled down. Don't want to forget that. And it's going to do our buttonhole. And when it's done, you're going to go ahead and take the whole thing off the machine, because remember, it's got the cording in it, in the buttonhole foot. So it's right now it's attached to the foot. So it's kind of cumbersome in that respect. But once you've got this off the machine, the extra threads there. Okay. I'm going to release the cord from the back and release the cord off the front, and then the presser foot will slide off. Now you can see where the cord has got the loop on the top and the cords are pulled through either side. I'm just going to slide that cord just gently like that, and then we're going to take a large-eyed needle and feed that through to the back side. Tie it off, use a little seam sealant, and my corded buttonhole is complete. This is also attractive if you want to put a different colored thread underneath your satin stitching, and because you can see the cord through it. But that's a great reinforced buttonhole when you're going to be extra strain or stress on a particular buttonhole or closure, or if you're doing a knit buttonhole to keep it from stretching out of shape. The last buttonhole I want to show you today is a knit buttonhole. When you have a real stretchy fabric, sweatshirt knit, t-shirt knit, fleece, you're going to want to do what's referred to as a knit buttonhole. Now, I have used the same tearaway stabilizer, and I'm going to place that underneath my fabric as well. Slide my fabric into my presser foot. I'm going to want again to use make sure I have my lever down, and I will also want to make sure that I have my topping fabric as well. This is just a standard washout, nothing special to it. I mean, it's one that you use with your embroidery. Slide that into place. Okay, now a knit buttonhole doesn't do a satin stitch, it basically does an X stitch. It's designed to keep the fabric from wavering or stretching out of shape when you're using the buttonhole itself. So it goes through the same process, straight stitch back, do the X stitch forward, and then your bar tack and end it. You could also do this as a corded buttonhole if you wanted to. When working with a heavier knit, such as this is a fleece or a sweatshirt knit, robe product that you're working with, you may at some point have the fabric doubled, and you're still going to want to do the same setup with the tearaway underneath, the washout on top. Same buttonhole I did before. That's a standard knit buttonhole. Still going to use stabilizer underneath. This is just a tearaway, and I use the scraps left over from my embroidery projects. I save those, and I can repurpose those little pieces underneath my buttonholes. And that gives me a real nice buttonhole. Remove the stabilizer again, tear off the tearaway from the back side, and you've got a beautiful buttonhole for your knit. Now, if you don't have a knit buttonhole, you can always do a corded buttonhole on your knit project. To open your buttonholes with the buttonhole knife, you get a block and the knife in a set. The knife has a sharp edge. Do save the cover for when you're storing it. But you're going to place the block underneath the buttonhole. You're going to center the knife in between the two legs on top of the buttonhole and simply press. Now, it will take a little bit of effort, but it goes right through the fabric without too much trouble. If your buttonhole is larger than 1/2 inch, which is the width of the knife, you may have to do the cut more than once. To use a seam ripper to open a buttonhole, there are a couple of tricks. You're going to push the seam ripper into the very beginning of the buttonhole through both layers. Then fold the fabric and push the seam ripper out at the end of the buttonhole back through the top. You may have to wiggle it a little bit to get it to come out right at the very end. Make sure you have the fold in the fabric pointed away from you, and then push through the fabric with your seam ripper. And that will cut through your buttonhole without ripping through the end of the buttonholes. I like this better than using the pins to stop it. It saves your seam ripper from getting dull. To attach your standard button, you're going to need a buttonhole foot, and you're going to use a program on your machine if you have it available. If not, you can use a zigzag. Refer to your owner's manual as to how the foot is attached. You can also use a zigzag foot, but it's not as nice as the button foot itself. You align your button to where you want it placed, slide that underneath your presser foot, and using your flywheel, rock the needle back and forth into the holes to make sure it's going to clear that center. Never step onto your foot control before you do. Most buttons are 4 millimeters on center between the holes, but you may have to adjust it depending upon your particular button. And there's your button attached to your fabric.
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll get the latest tips, tricks, and techniques for couture sewing.